Okay, so thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for this opportunity to discuss about such a hot topic and what will more or less be our greatest challenge for the forthcoming 3 decades. So I would like to thank the organizers for giving also this opportunity to us to discuss. And I will get into the topic and cut into the chase right away. So since the agreement on the IMO greenhouse gas emission strategy, we have come across numerous thoughts, some overambitious, some sort of target, and some somehow heretic, we could say. Irrespective of the debate of whether this is about fuels, technology, speed, ports, trades, logistics, we know for sure that collaborative action will be required. Or to put it more accurately, synergy and collaborative action could be saving us lots of money in meeting the targets. What we haven't seen yet, though, is the bridge between real operations, environmental, societal expectations. I would kindly ask you to try and assess the extent of this gap together. For this reason, we have an excellent set of panelists and shipping stakeholders, I would add, because if something decarbonization can teach us is to better listen to those who will have to put their money where their mind is. So, in this context, kindly welcome Mr. Rohdenburg, CEO, Internship Navigation, Mr. Philippos Philis, Chairman and CEO, Lemissoler Navigation, Mr. Scott Bergeron, Director of Business Development and Strategy of Oldendorff Carriers, Mr. Hugh Crooks, CFO of Ridgebury Tankers, and Professor Konstantin Arcoumanis, former Ambassador of Greece for Energy Policy and New Technologies, former Vice President, City University, London. And I will kick off with Mr. Rohdenburg, Dieter. So, my initial question is the following. So, Dieter, can we quantify the regulatory and technology risk today? How could we mitigate the risk of a changing reality?
Yeah, first of all.
No, yeah. First of all, thank you for having me, and congratulations to Nicolas and Olga for a very well organized and a team organized conference. Well, I think we heard in the last panel already that when Yannis was mentioning what's in the cards at the moment in terms of regulation and what we are up to. And I think what we are seeing now, talking about EEDI, talking about EEXI, this is only the beginning of what will come over the next years. Regulation is very much driven nowadays by public opinion. Public opinion is made by more and more by social media. So I'm absolutely certain that we will see a lot more restrictive regulation coming for shipping as well. And if we look at the very ambitious goals that the IMO has set, it's clear that we will need further regulation. And I'm sure that the addition of the Green Deal that the EU has come up with, which is clear, we will see ETS for shipping, is only one thing on the way. So whilst we are all probably confident that 2030 is manageable for shipping, I personally think 2050 is not manageable, and therefore more regulation will be required, is on the way, and the regulatory risk remains high.
Thank you. Dieter, you mentioned that there is quite some ambition in what IMO requires, but you also made a reference to ETS, and I will come to Philippos and ask him, so there is an ETS legislation currently going on, and at the same time we have seen you supporting through personally and through Cyprus Shipping Chamber, the creation of an R&D program, of an R&D instrument under IMO. And my question would be, having ETS in mind, is there really a role for this kind of R&D instrument, or ETS will play that role and practically we're trying to have a power game between IMO and the EU in who will be leading this?
Thank you, Panos. Thank you for the invitation and Nikos and all. Panos, is not one question, and I will try to put everything in a perspective. I think it is a fact that Mrs. van der Leyen pushed a lot the Green Deal, and unavoidable shipping will become also part of the ETS. It is decided, and DG Climate is working towards developing the concept of the ETS to be implemented for shipping. It is expected though that by June next year, 21, that the system will be ready. We as the industry, and I'm talking not only Cyprus Shipping Chamber, but International Shipping, International Chamber of Shipping, EXA, and all the roundtable commercial associations are against any regional measure, because this might distort the trade, might penalize European shipowners, and especially those who operate coastal and only intra-European, and also other owners that they will call for any reason in European ports. So we are for a global measure under IMO, and we are totally against ETS. Having said that, ETS is a fact. Therefore, the industry tried to open a dialogue with the DG Climate in order to at least make or formulate the ETS system into the extent that will penalize as less as possible the shipowning side, the European, specifically the European shipowner side. This is not an easy target, and we know that will be a lot of discussions with DG Climate in order to agree in a sort of a system that will be acceptable to the industry. But on the other side, okay, ETS is not a substitute to the R&D fund. And despite the fact that there were a lot of comments regarding the very low amount that $2 per ton consumed is nothing, and DG Climate, DG Concept is nowhere close to what we aim to collect from ETS. Still, the industry suggested that, and it is part of the long discussions that we have since 2008 about the levy, the market-based measure that will be under IMO as a global measure. And if I recall well, by that time, the allocation of that collected amount was around 20%. It initially has been estimated to $10 levy on every ton consumed, and this was based on the 100 billion dollar green fund through Paris Agreement, and practically shipping contributing around 2.6, 2.7 towards a total emission. The allocation to us was 26 billion, and calculated reverse, we landed to the $10. The 20% are the $2. Practically, because IMO delayed, we pushed forward the fund towards demonstrating outside that we as the industry are doing quite a lot towards a collective decarbonization, despite the fact that the shipowners have done a lot towards decarbonization in general. And this is proven, but it's not communicated well. And I think this is our problem as the industry. 2008, we have 16,000 ships, over 5,000 GT, traded worldwide, responsible for 80–90%. 2019, we have 32,000.
Ladies,
yes. And we didn't reach, or we are very close to reach, the emissions that is the baseline of 2008. That means we have as an industry a relative reduction of 50%, which has to be communicated well.
I agree with you. The numbers are there, but still, I have to play the devil's advocate here. There is still a huge gap between the EU expectation and what is now being discussed at the IMO. So, quite quickly, what is your two things? What is your view about the awareness of the shipping community of where the EU wants to drive things? And the second thing is, how do you feel that we could bridge that gap? Is there a possibility that the EU and the IMO could eventually come up with one final conclusion?
The bad story is that the European Commission decided for ETS. We still, as industry, have time. That means we have 1.5 years until they eventually form the plan, and maybe another year until the implementation. Both DG Climate and DG Com believe that if IMO by that time comes with a global measure that will be acceptable for EU meeting at least the targets, or towards meeting the targets we set for 2050, then there is a possibility and hope that EU will withdraw the ETS for shipping.
Okay. So now moving to Scott and my favorite topic, so technology. So Scott, I'd like to ask you quite openly. Today we have already seen a number of reports dictating the pathways to 2050. What is your view? Are we there? Are we close to 2050? What we have available today will be part of the solution, maturing some of the existing technology, or is there going to be some revolutionary road that we are not aware of yet? What is your view?
I think we're far from being there from today's standpoint. And what makes matters even worse is every time we think we're getting close, let's take LNG for an example, that's the new clean fuel. It doesn't take too much time before the environmentalists come down very heavy and explain why LNG isn't the panacea that we would like it to be. So I think the pathway forward is going to be a combination of technology and revolution. And we can agree about research and development funds. I think this concept has some merit. Research and development is going to go a lot further than trading. I think trading is synonymous with greenwashing, because you're not actually reducing carbon, you're just shifting where it is. So we have a long way to go.
And going to Hugh, and a bit of the societal and governance issues. So you have recently, Hugh, you have recently been quoted saying that ESG, environmental social governance focus, has unrecognizably increased compared to past investor interest. Can you share with us a few examples? And do you see this trend becoming the norm? How do you consider addressing this matter from Ridgebury perspective?
Absolutely. It's something that's been really dramatic, and I think those of us who are more in the, with investors and markets in New York or London are probably seeing it first. But I think it comes through almost to everyone. People, you'll see it with banks and the Poseidon principles. They see it with public companies and shareholder activists, but we're a private company that's backed by institutional capital. But at the back of any of these capital providers, the people who actually hold the savings and investable money are their university endowments, who have student bodies and faculty bodies that are demanding that they decarbonize. They're public pension funds that have also, very often, populations of professionals, of public workers who are looking for the same thing. So unless you truly have your own family money in this business, to the extent that you need any type of institutional capital, it's now risen to the top of the list. And for a long time, the managers of these funds, I think, resisted some of this because they believed that their mandate was to maximize the returns for their holders, the pensioners. But what's happened is that over the last decade or so, the returns in the energy sector, and especially in shipping, have been so terrible that the managers don't feel required to hold these amounts. So I just actually was reading in the Wall Street Journal this morning that the composition of the S&P dedicated to energy a little more than a decade ago was about 14% of the market. Today it's 4%, and so a money manager can afford not to have 4% tracking in here. So there's not a need necessarily for them to invest in this area, and because of that, those who still want to need to justify what they're doing, and they need to convince the people they report to that they're investing with the best companies in a sector. So our biggest single investor is a $38 billion energy-focused fund, and they have an annual meeting with all their investors. And even 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the ESG portion was at the very end of the meeting. It was an internal lawyer, and he'd get up and say that they follow good practices. Now it leads the meeting, and it's because it's gone from being a compliance thing to a strategic imperative, and even some people see it as a strategic advantage. If as we're all fighting ultimately for capital with banks on any of these social issues, if we sell a ship and it's going to be recycled, we do that according to Hong Kong Convention. I've personally been to the yards in Alang. The banks that we work with in New York want to know that you've followed your ships all the way through there. They want to see that commitment, and so it's not something that's passing. I think it's only going to get more intense, and it'll filter throughout the industry.
Yeah, but okay, we have also seen the Poseidon Principles initiative coming out in July. The question is, are we ready to really fund our initiatives and our aspirations, our ambition, in terms of really putting money where the ambition lies? And I'm asking this because so far, perhaps this is more of a risk-driven decision. Do we see that access to capital will depend on environmental criteria in the future? Or could you say that access to capital will be cheaper for environmental driven and conscious decisions?
I think, of course, one of the challenges is most of us have only been trying to actually make money and make a profit, and we haven't done a great job of that over the last 10 years. It's been a really difficult industry to be in. And so that's why you almost have to separate your brain. You know that we have to be part of these solutions. And as a global industry, I think have some advantages versus other industries in our ability to do that. But the numbers that are thrown out, you put it in your notes. People are saying $1 trillion. If you're making $3,000 a day, it would take you 980,000 years to make $1 trillion. And so, a million years is not actually what the EU or the IMO are looking for. So these numbers are a bit debilitating and challenging. And the banks have the same issue. They're coming out of areas, so they're trying to put focus on things with the Poseidon Principles, but in the end, they, which I think is the correct thing, that they need a project to make sense, and that's where you get to these other ideas, whether it's R&D funds. But I think and I'll shut up because I've now taken too much time. But I think the one other thing we all have to be really prepared for here is the possibility that, again, we've had a difficult decade against a strong global economic picture for 10 years. We've all been somewhat probably saved from a worse fate because global trade growth has grown. In the tanker sector where we are, ton miles keep growing with the growth of exports in the West running all the way to the East. I think we have to be prepared that instead of just continuing to grow and someone providing a zero carbon fuel, that we end up in an industry where the path to carbon is anti-growth, whether it's carbon taxes, whether it's other measures that both within our industry and globally actually mean fewer ton miles, which is, I think one of the other ways that you meet these targets. And so I think as owners, you have to be very, very careful where you're investing. If you're buying a ship and expecting to operate it for 20 years or for 10 years, and that at the end of 10 years it'll have the residual value you expect that you can sell, I think that's a dangerous move. I think we're all going to have to be very, very nimble on our investment and our asset management.
Yeah, thank you, Hugh. And I'll keep what you said about ton miles and move on to Professor Arcoumanis. So, Professor Arcoumanis, you have a very good idea, knowledge of the energy landscape, and I would like to ask you. Today we talk a lot about fuels, but we don't talk so much about the trades of tomorrow. So many of our ships are carbon carriers. So we have coal trades, oil trades, and what is your view? Where are we going to end up in 2050? So are we going to have the same trades? Because I see too much focus on the fuel, but I don't see too much focus on cargoes.
Let me start from a slightly different base, and I'll come to you. First of all, decarbonization is not a shipping issue. Starting from that important assumption, it's a global issue. It requires global convergence and agreement, and the costs are such that almost are independent of any contribution of shipping. And let's come to more specific issues. Carbonization, the process is going to take place on land. The major factor will be on land. It's not a shipping issue, it's not IMO 2020, and therefore, in the future, the role of IMO on this issue is not going to be as important as we expect. Let me be more specific. If you speak informally to people in Brussels, they are committed that by 2050 we need to have zero carbon fuels. Let's keep that on the side and we'll come back to that. Second comment that you get, and I agree with what Mr. Philis said, they started disliking LNG, not arguing it's not so good and therefore it's greenhouse credentials. They don't like it anymore. So we are faced with two important steps. 2030 to dislike and start ignoring LNG, and 2050 to start ignoring carbon-based fuels. Of course, it's a prediction, and nobody knows. But it seems that a carbon levy will be very useful. Of course, not at the $2 per ton, a little bit more, maybe $5. ETS, I agree, there is a lot of pressure in Brussels. They keep referring to ETS. And what I know is that at least talking to the Greek minister of shipping, he's going to argue that all the organizations from ABS to Intercargo, Tanko, Bimco are against ETS. And it's that a unanimous voice against ETS. The second point is, if decarbonization is a global issue, why not divert all the funding or most of the funding globally that goes to research in universities and other agencies towards decarbonization? The scale of the operation is such that will require such a global measure. And just to close, I'm worried that EU's voice in the future will be stronger than that of IMO on decarbonization for some of the reasons that I just explained.
In a sense of, let's say, a light poll, since we discussed this here, do we have, how many of us believe that the ETS will become a reality? So, I think, Mr. Philis, you don't believe that the ETS will become a reality?
Yes, it will, but it depends on how fast IMO will work and how seriously it's taken there. It's known that IMO is very slow in decision and developing of any new regulation. But this time they claim that they are working with the velocity of the light. They are faster than ever. They realize the pressure they feel from the European Union, but I'm afraid an ETS will come in place, and maybe if later on IMO comes with a global system, then the ETS, the European, the regional measure will be withdrawn. It's a part.
But, all right, then moving on from ETS, I would like to extend my previous question on the issue of carbon carriers. So, have we considered, and I will start with Hugh, have we considered the fact that our vessels carry carbon? And I will just mention here the somehow ironic thing of having today owners who want to order a VLCC, and they want to make sure that the vessel will be able to run on ammonia in 20 years down the road. The irony of having a 2 million barrels hydrocarbon carrier that you care only about fuel, being ammonia and zero carbon. So how do you deal with that thought in Ridgebury tankers?
No, I think that's clearly. I think one mistake that ship owners often make is we spend a lot of time analyzing the dynamics within shipping when we're making our decisions. We look at the order book, we look at specifications, we look at how one type of ship compares to another and how the competitive advantages and ages, and don't spend enough time remembering that we are a derivative industry, and in the case of tankers, I mean, in the short run, we know, at least we knew before coronavirus, that 100 million barrels need to move tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, and the day after that, and the refineries need the fuel, and so we have some confidence there. But I think we have to take this into account, and I agree. The idea that somehow shipping, that the world would have provided a zero carbon fuel that can power ships, but tankers still have the same demand, for the product they're carrying to feed refineries. That doesn't make any sense. And as people said, it's a global, this is a global issue. Shipping is a small amount of it. So I think it's something, as I said, that we just have to, it's not something that, it's something you would have to think about if you were ordering a new ship. And it's one of the reasons we tend to stick a little bit more into the middle-aged part, because we think that predictions get very hazy after a few years.
So, all right, and that's a good start for my following question. So, if you were to order a vessel today, or the day after, tomorrow, what would be the optimum technology to apply today, again, with everything that you know, and the risks that you're willing to take. So it's open to the panel. Scott, would you like to? Yes.
First, I just want to make a comment about carbon. Oldendorff carriers, we're some 700 ships. We carry 320 million tons per year. Half of that is iron ore and coal. Two very carbon-intensive products. And coal is dead, but long live coal, because it's not going away. It hasn't peaked yet. And I think being in Europe, sitting in North America as I do, you can have a very critical eye on the future of coal. But the future actually has some promise, particularly in the developing economies. And in spite of what the EU wants to do with their mandates, Asia is going to be using coal for a very long time. That said, fuel of today is very difficult. As I said before, there's no perfect solution today. Developing ammonia and developing methanol, for example, two of the leading fuel options after LNG, it's very carbon intensive to produce these. So you have to look at the second generation, if you will. I think one of the fuels that holds some promise are some of the technologies around the second stage biodiesels, the biofuels, burning municipal waste, and kind of this whole back to the future scenario of extracting energy through these processes, and you're starting with a product that consumes carbon as it is. So working towards some negative carbon approach. But there's no fuel today. If there were one today that everybody could shift to, we would see it. You see just a small speculation of orders in LNG. And so quickly has the hammer come down on how bad LNG is going to be because of this so-called methane slip. I think technology will come to improve that, and that LNG can have a role. I think ammonia is maybe one of the flavors of the year, but ammonia is only going to work. You have to study this from well to wake. You have to study this from the life cycle of the ship. Hughes' partner Bob Burke says this all the time. I mean, how much carbon are we using to build new ships and scrap old ones? So I think we have to start looking at this more holistically. And in that regard, if ammonia is the future, then we have to develop the ammonia in a carbon-free way. And that requires solar, wind, other type of technologies.
1 trillion, as we said. So I will just pass the floor to Dieter. I want to have your opinion as well on what could be a future-proof vessel today.
Well, I think what Scott was saying is absolutely right. I mean, we talk about ammonia or hydrogen as carbon-free fuels, but they are not. You need to produce them, and as you do that with renewable energy, they are not carbon neutral. So I don't think that's really, they may be a part of future fuel mixes. I think it's very well possible. But clearly, if you talk about a way to wake a life cycle view on your fuels, clearly they cannot be the final solution. If you ask me what do I do today or tomorrow, I would order a standard ship as you have it today as well, because there is nothing else. LNG is not an option for tramp owners like we are. It's probably different if you're a container operator or if you have short sea trade where you have the infrastructure, but it's certainly not an option for us. So for now, I think all we can do is try to optimize hull forms, propulsion systems, ship designs in general, work on the operational side. That's probably where you can make a difference. But in terms of fuel, I don't really see that as an alternative to what we're doing today.
Yeah. So I will just have a short ending statement from each one, and the question is: we have today a question about $1 trillion USD needed to build the necessary infrastructure. How confident we feel that land-based economy will help shipping deal with that problem, and how or whether we should feel that shipping should move on its own, take its own initiatives in dealing with this matter. And starting with Professor Arcoumanis, what's your short ending statement of this?
I respect the view of my colleagues in London. They are next door to us. Of course, they try to include everything possible, but the figures are out of any imagination in terms of costs. However, at the same time, estimates that 20 billion over the 10-year period will solve the problem and will manage to bring ammonia and hydrogen, and I use these two because they are two sides of the same coin, effectively, as the only future fuel ahead. It is even 20 billion is very small. So the truth may be close to 100 billion, but again, these are all estimates. This is an academic exercise. Let's take it like this.
Hugh, so shipping, moving on, Tom?
I think when that happens and has happened many times in different areas where, I think in general, ships always get built too quickly for these things. So any time we're all promised that there are going to be new refineries, coming up in a certain area, and therefore, long-range product carriers are the investment of the future. People rush out and build a lot of long-range product carriers, and the sector never quite reaches its promise. Similarly with LNG, sometimes we, get excited by a theme, and so I think, certainly we wouldn't invest ahead of some, planned change in infrastructure. I think you have to see that would actually be happening. And I agree with Dieter. I think for tanker and bulker owners particularly, unfortunately it doesn't align with these climate goals. But what you're doing is focusing all the time on efficiency. There are some amazing paints. It's not as exciting as a hydrogen-powered yacht that Mr. Gates was reported to have bought and now reported not to have bought. But these, those are some exciting things. But for the rest of us, it's still about squeezing efficiency out of your operation every day, staying very, very flexible. I think staying liquid, staying not too highly levered. I think there are going to be some real challenging ups and downs, and the extent of when you invest, how much you invest is going to be really important. But I don't see like a big bet that could be made on the back of anything to do with potential future infrastructure, fuel changes, or things right now.
Thank you, Scott.
I think the professor already said it. This issue is much bigger than shipping itself. With 2 or 3% of the emission responsibility on our shoulders, we need help. But we're a soft target for the environmentalists. And ship owners tend to comply. We put scrubbers on our ships. We put ballast water treatment systems on our ships. So we willingly comply with the demands of the environmentalists for some reason. That said, the money has to come from the logistics chain of supplying the fuel. The money has to come from the fuel producers. It's not just shipping. It's the entire community.
Philippos.
I have a little bit different opinion on the fuels and on the cost. 1 trillion is way back from the amounts required. There is a study from Energy Defense Fund from US that quantifies the cost to produce ammonia for the consumption of 8 Panamaxes a year, and it is close to 1 billion. If you try to calculate that for the entire fleet, we are talking about only 5 trillions to produce ammonia for shipping alone, plus the alternative energy. That means you need also to invest on alternative energy, and plus the infrastructure for the banking, etc. So the cost is huge, but this doesn't concern shipping. If the availability of fuel is there, shipping will follow very easily. The technology is there, and I believe, replying also to the question, what should an owner order today? Possibly a vessel optimized, of course, but with an engine, a main engine that can be easily converted to burn alternative fuels, whatever this will be.
Did it?
Yeah,
I think it was all said now. I agree that your shipping needs help. I mean, clearly we don't build ships engines and we don't design fuels. We are buying. To a certain extent, we can influence a little bit what is being made available, but we are buying what is available in the market. So I think the drive by ICS and others now to create the fund for research and energy, research and development is a good move. I think that will also show that shipping takes an active interest in where we are heading. But beyond that, we really need the support of other land-based industries.
Right. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, President. I mean, I think we've got to finish the panel now because we're over on the time. But I just want to examine one main point which was mentioned by Professor Arcoumanis. And I think that's the message which I think, having heard the panel, which we're very thankful for, the message has to get out loud and clear to the audience for those who are prepared to argue, to fight it, or to do whatever they can. Is the basic is decarbonisation is a global issue and not a shipping issue. We've said this time and time again. We know the reason behind it is because the shipping market has always been fragmented. But I think basically unless things get work, we have to do something fairly constructive. A united front for all people who are in the audience who are involved in business, which in fact will probably be decision makers in the future. It has to be the element of synergy amongst the big players to ensure that the message gets across loud and clear. It's a global issue and not a shipping issue. Thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to thank all panelists for very interesting views shared here, and we will need to give them a round of applause for